Welcome back to our news bulletin. We start with Turkey, which says a Syrian army helicopter has been shot down in northwest Idlib province. The defense ministry says the helicopter was downed by rebels as they pushed back Syrian troops from the town of Naireb. Tensions between Damascus and Ankara escalated after Syrian forces launched a renewed push to capture rebel-held Idlib last month. Over the past week, Syrian forces' attacks have killed 13 Turkish soldiers in the province, prompting a retaliation from Ankara. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Syrian government will pay a heavy price for attacks on Turkish troops. Meanwhile, Syrian forces have seized control of a key highway in northwest region for the first time since 2012. Kremlin has called for implementation of a ceasefire deal between Russia and Turkey, saying attacks on coalition forces must stop. More on Middle East. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has accused Iran of developing ballistic missiles through a satellite launch. In a statement, Pompeo said the U.S. will build support around the world to confront the Iranian ballistic missile activity. He added that Washington will continue to impose enormous pressure on Iran to change its behavior. The accusation comes 2 days after Iran unveiled a new short-range missile having a range of 200 kilometers, after its Victory satellite failed to reach the Earth orbit. Iran is celebrating the 41st anniversary of the Islamic Revolution, which toppled the Pahlavi monarchy in 1979. In Tehran, thousands are rallying in 12 major routes across the capital, leading to Freedom Square. Speaking at a rally, President Hassan Rouhani said the revolution was for people from all walks of life. Criticizing the U.S., he said the massive turnout is the best response to Washington and oppressors. The president said congregations on this day show that people of Iran respect their freedom and independence. A U.S. report says attacks on reconstruction missions in Afghanistan have killed over 2,200 people since 2002 and wounded almost 3,000. The Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction's human cost report comes as a suicide bombing in Kabul left 6 people dead, including 4 soldiers. Those killed in attacks on non-combat missions since 2002 include over 280 Americans, 216 of whom were soldiers. The SIGAR report's death toll also includes 131 Afghan soldiers and 124 third country nationals. The rest are all Afghan civilians. The report adds, violence jumped to record levels in the final quarter of 2019 despite ongoing peace talks between the Taliban and Washington. This is SIGAR's first assessment report to focus on casualties in reconstruction operations rather than financial cost. In India, the ruling BJP has conceded a defeat in New Delhi state elections as the Aam Aadmi Party is on course to win 63 seats in 70-member assembly. Arvind Kejriwal called his party's victory a dawn of new era in politics and the entire country's win. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's ruling BJP is already on the back foot after failing in recent state elections in Maharashtra and Jharkhand. These results come as the Indian government struggles to contain anger over the citizenship bill, which critics say is anti-Muslim. Early in the day, New Delhi police baton charged Jamia Millia University students protesting against the citizenship law. Health officials said over 10 students sustained critical injuries. Indian-occupied Kashmir has observing a complete shutdown on the 36th martyrdom anniversary of liberation leader Muhammad Maqbool Butt. India hanged the pro-freedom activist in New Delhi's Tihar jail in 1984. All parties, Hurriyat Conference, Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front, and other pro-freedom parties gave the call for protests and rallies. Meanwhile, journalists in the valley have decried threats, attacks, and intimidation by Indian troops. They said New Delhi has curbed media freedom as internet shutdown hampers reporting. The valley is reeling under Indian curfew and communications blackout for 191 days. In a latest development, Sudan has agreed to hand over former President Omar al-Bashir to the International Criminal Court. In 2008, the UN estimated that 300,000 people killed because of the war, though Khartoum disputes the figure. More than 2 million people were displaced in the conflict. Bashir's 30-year rule came to an end last year when he was removed in a military coup amid protests in the country. Separately, at the African summit in Ethiopia, UN Chief Antonio Guterres called for Sudan to be removed from the US list of state sponsors of terrorism. This will make the country eligible again for debt relief and financing from the IMF and World Bank. In Geneva, the WHO warns the novel coronavirus is a very grave threat for the planet as it hosts the first major conference on fighting the epidemic. 400 scientists are participating in the two-day meeting as the death toll from the virus surged past 1,000, with over 42,700 confirmed cases in China. China's President Xi Jinping has said the country will win the battle against the virus. The conference aims to review how the virus is transmitted and the possibility of developing vaccines against it. WHO head Tedros Adhanom said while 99% of all coronavirus cases are in China, but it still poses a threat to the rest of the world. Participants of the conference will also discuss the possible source of the virus, which is thought to have originated in bats.
We are still in a very early stage of understanding this virus, how it is transmitted, the source of the virus, the incubation period, the clinical feature, the severity of it, etc. One of them is the incubation period. We are saying it's from 1 to 14 days.
In another development, the EU says it will host an extraordinary meeting of health ministers on Thursday to discuss the novel coronavirus outbreak. The European Commission for Crisis Management said now is the time to join forces to stop the epidemic. So far, 30 cases of the new strain have been found in Europe. The Global Health Organization has warned cases outside of China could accelerate. The conference will discuss the spread of the disease and the bloc's response to the outbreak. Last week, the German health minister suggested Europe could impose restrictions on travelers from China. Singapore has kicked off Asia's largest aerospace event under heightened scrutiny as thousands of visitors shunned the air show over coronavirus fears. Over 70 exhibitors, including U.S. aerospace giant Lockheed Martin, Canada's Bombardier, and plane maker de Havilland have decided to skip the show. 10 Chinese companies have also pulled out after Singapore imposed a ban on people traveling from China. Officials said they have taken extra precautions, including fever screening for attendees. The biennial Singapore Air Show usually attracts hundreds of global aerospace firms and airlines to the financial hub. But this may not be the case this year. Moving on, in Lebanon, thousands of protesters have gathered outside the parliament in Beirut against a vote of confidence for Prime Minister Hassan Diab's new cabinet. Security forces fired tear gas and water cannon at demonstrators trying to block MPs from reaching the parliament. The parliament is set to vote on a government policy statement that says painful steps are needed to address the financial crisis. Protesters lobbed rocks at security forces deployed at several locations around the city center. The new government took office nearly 3 months after Saad al-Hariri resigned under pressure from sweeping protests. Protesters have expressed distrust in the ruling class and the newly appointed prime minister. Yemen says the UN aid operation for the war-torn country is under severe threat with obstructions from Houthi rebels. In an interview, Yemen's Minister Abdul Raqib Fateh said the government believes the militia misuses aid as a cover to finance war efforts. He said scaling back the aid in areas under Houthi control will affect the citizens and not the armed rebels. Major donors and some of the world's biggest aid agencies are meeting in Brussels to forge a collective response against the threat. Meanwhile, UN official in Yemen, Lisa Grande, said relief agencies must operate in an environment where they can uphold humanitarian principles. Aid access constraints are affecting nearly 7 million Yemenis who depend on assistance. In Bangladesh, 16 Rohingya refugees have died after a boat capsized near St. Martin's Island in the Bay of Bengal. The Coast Guard says 70 refugees on their way to Malaysia have been rescued. Officials said some 130 people were on the fishing vessel for the hazardous journey. They said an operation is underway to save the remaining people. Officials say all of the migrants are mainly from the refugee camps in Cox's Bazar, who were lured by traffickers. Around 750,000 Rohingya who fled the Myanmar military crackdown in 2017 reside in Bangladesh. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. We are back with Ireland, where the main opposition party Fianna Fáil has won the most seats in the country's general elections. The party has taken 38 seats, only one ahead of Sinn Féin, who recorded a historic result. The ruling party Fine Gael finished third with 35 seats. With first preferences counted, Sinn Féin led the table with 24.5% of the vote. It was followed on 22% by Fianna Fáil and 21% for Fine Gael. The two traditional main parties have ruled out a coalition with left-wing Sinn Féin, citing its tax policies and IRA past as deterrents.
So we've commenced discussions and contact with the leaders of the Green Party, the Social Democrats, People Before Profit, the Labour Party. I hope that we will meet over the coming days to explore in real terms whether we have the numbers and whether the political will exists.
Moving on, Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro says he will go to the international courts to fight U.S. sanctions. This comes after the U.S. Treasury Department added the Venezuelan airline Conviasa and its entire fleet to a sanctions list. President Maduro said he will not let Washington inflict damage on the airline. He called the move a terror attack and blamed U.S.-backed leader Juan Guaido for the sanctions.
It is a terrorist attack by the right wing ordered by Donald Trump and Ivan Duque, and by the homeland betrayer Juan Guaido against the public services of Venezuela.
Toppled Bolivian leader Evo Morales has left Argentina for Cuba for a medical procedure. Morales moved to Argentina from Bolivia when his October election victory was voided after accusations of vote rigging. Morales' spokesperson said the leader took an unscheduled flight to Cuba for health reasons and will return this weekend. Since arriving in Argentina, Morales has campaigned for his Movement for Socialism party ahead of Bolivia's upcoming presidential election. Recent opinion polls put the MAS ahead against the divided opposition, but not by enough to avoid a second-round runoff. In Brazil, heavy rains have pounded Sao Paulo, causing severe flooding. Major road arteries are submerged in water, causing traffic jams. Commuter trains have been stopped in their tracks by the heavy rain. The Titiaia and Peneiras rivers broke their banks, inundating low-lying areas and stranding cars on bridges. Weather reports suggest heavier rains are expected to hit Sao Paulo and surrounding areas in the coming days. Australia says torrential rain could put out the remaining bushfires in New South Wales by the end of the week. Since Friday, parts of the Australian state have experienced their heaviest rainfall in 30 years. The Rural Fire Service said they will be able to extinguish the remaining 24 fires, 4 of them uncontained. The downpour has already doused 2 of the biggest and longest-running blazes. Australia has been battling hundreds of bushfires since September, which experts have ascribed to climate change. In Queensland, just 1 fire remains active, while 9 are still burning in South Australia state. Iraq's capital city of Baghdad has recorded second snowfall in a century, bringing pleasure to the residents of war-battered country. Dozens of people came out to enjoy the rare weather amid high political tensions. The last recorded snowfall in Baghdad was in 2008, but it was quick and slushy. Some of Iraq's residents said they are witnessing the white flakes for the first time in their lives. The rare moment provided an opportunity for families to share the snowy weather. Iraq's meteorological center has predicted more snowfall till Wednesday. The country has been hit by a succession of extreme weather events in recent years. Weather experts say Iraq lacks the funding or infrastructure to cope with climate change and the desertification of once productive land. In Indonesia, a cafe worker is struggling to persuade his small community of para-pair to keep a cleaner city. The Ministry of Environment and Forestry says Parapeer produces around 2.7 tons of unmanaged waste each day. The hero of the story has found an interesting way to get the attention of the residents on the matter. What is it? Watch this report to find out.
36-year-old Rudy Hartono bought a Spider-Man outfit months ago to please his nephew. He didn't know he would find a noble cause to fight for. Each morning, he now picks up rubbish dumped or dropped onto the streets and beaches, wearing his Marvel costume for everyone to see and follow him.
My mission is to encourage and provide an example to the society through the famous character of Spider-Man to protect the environment and do real cleaning activities because environmental cleanliness creates healthy communities.
Indonesia, an archipelago of more than 17,000 islands, is believed to be the world's second largest producer of plastic waste after China, most of which ends up in the ocean.
Minimizing plastic waste is the most important thing to do because plastic is difficult to decompose.
Hartono is surely successful in his mission.
We need a creative role model to foster our interest in protecting the environment.
Me, especially as a youth, this is actually my duty.
Hartono now wants the government to pay attention to the issue and find a way to manage the waste.
When people think of racing animals, they think of horses, dogs, and even camels. But in Ecuador, children have been racing llamas for years. This report explains why.
Here in Ecuador's Andes, llamas are the four-legged athletes of choice and children are the riders. They have to feed them, groom them, and make sure the animals get enough exercise. Once a year, they pull on ponchos and the distinctive traditional leather and fur riding pants called zamaros to test their courage in a race called Lamin Gada.
Llama racing excited me. In my mind, I am thinking about whether I am going to win or lose.
Riders, sometimes as young as 2 or 4, climb onto their backs and bounce their way through the 500-meter race.
I feel good because I won the race this year. I am calling on people to look after the environment and not to burn nature.
This is the one day of the year when the symbol and work llama of the Andes Mountains becomes the star.
Children from a very young age are able to ride and have this connection with the camelet. Zulma and alpaca have been domesticated by the Indians. They are used to transport milk, firewood, and other materials that we use on a daily basis.
Because of its distinctive padded feet, the llama doesn't damage the land the way a horse can. So, the event helps promote the animal and preserve the delicate ecosystems of the mountains.
In London, a chewing gum artist is creating miniature marvels from throwaway culture. For the last 15 years, he has been recycling rubbish into artwork and helping preserve the environment. Watch this report to find out more.
Lying on a footbridge spanning the River Thames in London, 57-year-old Ben Wilson finalises his latest work.
People call me the chewing gum man. And for the last 15 years, I've been transforming discarded chewing gum, which is on the streets of London and beyond, into artwork. So it's taking a thoughtless action, trying to transform it, hopefully, into something positive.
Barely larger than a small coin, his creations are vivid, similar to psychedelic drawings, frequently signed and dated.
People naturally are inquisitive, so they come to me and they have to try and negotiate what's actually happening.
Wilson believes he's painted thousands of pieces of gum. He prides himself on his contribution to keeping London cleaner.
It's a technicality because the person who spat out the gum is the person that created the criminal damage.
Wilson collaborates with galleries and other artists for his income, but refuses any money to sign people's pieces of gum.
We'll be right back after a short break. Stay tuned. The EU's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, says London and Brussels will lose privileged access to each other's financial markets when the transitional period expires. Speaking in Strasbourg, Barnier said equivalence regimes governing relations with foreign partners on specific financial sectors would remain under the EU's control. Michel Barnier added the EU alone would decide whether to grant or withdraw equivalences from Britain. Following Brexit, the EU finds a potential financial competitor at its doorstep. Thus, Brussels is keen to maintain control of equivalence regimes, which it can currently revoke. However, Britain is pushing for a more jointly controlled system. The EU Parliament in Brussels is due to vote on a resolution backing the European Commission's negotiating mandate on Wednesday. U.S. stocks rise as Wall Street shrugged off concerns over the economic impact of the coronavirus outbreak. All three major Wall Street indices are trading higher. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is trading fractionally higher. The S&P 500 and Nasdaq Composite indices are also trading higher by about 0.5%. Stock markets across Europe also traded higher on coronavirus optimism. A U.S. court has approved the merger of American telecommunication company Sprint and German firm T-Mobile. The merger is worth of $26 billion. Federal Communications Commission Chairman Ajit Pai said the merger would not significantly harm competition. He said the merger will help close the digital divide and secure the U.S. leadership in 5G. The deal has already been approved by the federal regulators. Following the decision, shares of Sprint surged nearly 80%, while T-Mobile jumped to over 90%. U.S. President Donald Trump has proposed a nearly $5 trillion budget to Congress. The budget is a blueprint for Trump's policy priorities and a starting point for negotiations with Congress. The document proposes a 21% cut in foreign aid to $44 billion in the next fiscal year. It seeks major cuts to Medicaid and children's health insurance program. The Pentagon budget will see an $800 million increase and a $2 billion allocation for the U.S.-Mexico border wall. The White House wants to cut spending by nearly $4.5 trillion in 10 years and reduce the deficit by the same amount.
I think that ultimately the administration and Congress will go through a rigorous process where we will look line by line where we think that there are opportunities to pull back and where we think there are opportunities to invest. And Congress will always have a different view. Ultimately, the president will sign a document at the end of the day.
More from the U.S. President Donald Trump, who says the time has come for trade negotiations with the European Union. Speaking at the White House, Trump said Brussels has been treating Washington badly with barriers to U.S. goods. Relations between the two major economies have been deadlocked for months. Trump has already imposed heavy tariffs on EU goods in a dispute over Airbus. He has threatened more duties on European cars to force a change in trade policy. The World Bank has blamed development financial institutions for growing debt problems for poor countries. Speaking at a debt forum in Washington, World Bank President David Malpass said major development banks have a tendency for excessive and quick lending. Malpass said the Asian Development Bank is pushing billions of dollars into fiscally challenging situations. He said the African Development Bank is doing the same with Nigeria and South Africa. Malpass said more coordination is required among international financial institutions in lending contracts and being more transparent. The World Bank is implementing a new set of lending rules on July 1st. It will also unlock a new round of funding expected to make available $85 billion in loans and grants. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.